Come on in, everyone. Come on in. And I should say welcome back to what we call in season two of conversations on race and policing. Um, yeah, it is 2021, guys. So the first thing we're gonna do is just shake off 2020. Uh, just shake all the stresses, all the just all the different things that may have came about during 2020 as we open up a new dialogue, because we all know the meat of this conversation, the reason why we convene here weekly is to focus on the future. What happens now? What comes next? So now that we're in 2021, I want to thank you all for coming back to the show, and those of you that is your first time premiering the show, you're in for a ride. So definitely stay tuned. I want to remind everybody straight off the jump that as questions may pose to you during the presenters today, just post in the Q&A section. And you may just have a comment. It may not even be a question. You may just have a comment or anything like that that relates. But just utilize the Q&A section at the bottom left-hand side of your screen. It should be, or maybe in the bottom middle. Our screens are different. My apologies. But at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button. So just utilize that throughout the show, and we'll get through your questions as the show progresses. So let's start with introductions. I am Marlo Brooks, a senior studying English in the College of Arts and Letters at California State University of San Bernardino. So, welcome back again, everyone. I am joined by my background team. So, they're going to keep me well lit today. They're going to keep audio going, video going. There's one thing as well I wanted to share with my presenters today. If you guys have any screen sharing capabilities that you would like to use, they will be available for you as well if you need those during your presentations. So here we are, season two, conversations on race and policing. Today's topic will be speaking on contrasting police responses between Black Lives Matter protests and MAGA, Make America Great Again protests. Um, Speaking on the differences on how police respond and react to the different protesters out there in the world. So, if you've got a chance to protest during the highlight of 2020, when protesting was big again, then this may touch you or speak to you in ways. Or if you know someone that got a chance to protest during those times, this would be a lot of conversation to share as well with your friends, peers, and family. So, as we all know, and for those who are just joining us, when we start any event at Cal State San Bernardino, we like to pay homage to our I don't know why I'm missing all my words, but we like to pay homage to the ground on which CSUSB sits on. So, which is called a land acknowledgement. For those who don't know, a land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes and respects indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of a given geographical area and enduring relationships that exist between indigenous peoples and their ancestral territories. So, many of you don't know that CSUSB does sit on the ancestral land of the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. So we always love to pay homage to which the land in which we sit on. So we recognize that California State University of San Bernardino sits on the territory and ancestral land of the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. We recognize that every member of the CSUSB community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founded in 1965. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm indigenous sovereignty and work to hold CSUSB more accountable to the needs of American Indian and indigenous people. So we thank you. And I'm just reading a few notes. Thank you, Jeremy. Perfect. So, again, if it's your first time joining us, we have a great episode ahead of us tonight. And just to read off some of the guests you'll get a chance to hear from tonight. We'll get a chance to speak with Shaila Dewan. She's a national criminal justice editor for the New York Times. I think she will have a lot of input as well. We'll get a chance to speak with a returning presenter tonight, Michael German, which is he's a fellow with he fellows with Brennan Center, the Brennan Center for Justice, Liberty, and National Security Program. We have a chance to hear from Kurtis Lee tonight as well, a national political correspondent for the LA Times, and as well as Tina Nguyen, which is a White House reporter for Politico. So definitely stay tuned. And without further ado, I'll just go ahead and introduce our first guest who will be presenting. Our guests will come in and give you all a little bit about themselves and what they do, and then go right into their presentation. So again, at any point where you may have a question for a guest specifically, or just a question in general, or may just want to make a comment as well, spike that Q&A button, and we'll get to that portion during the Q&A section tonight. So thank you guys for joining us. And without further ado, we're going to welcome back our friend of the show, Michael German. You're up first, buddy.
Okay. Hi, everyone. As we mentioned that I'm with the Brennan Center for Justice. I formerly served 16 years as an FBI special agent, in particular this conversation. Spent some time working undercover in white supremacist and far-right militant groups, and have been studying that since I left the FBI in 2004. Obviously, over the last several years, we've seen a lot of the police violence directed at protesters, but somehow doesn't get directed at protesters when they happen to be from white supremacist groups or the far right. I've written 3 reports on this topic over the last 3 years. One called Wrong Priorities for Fighting Terrorism that focused on the Justice Department's domestic terrorism programming. One called Fighting Far-Right Violence and Hate Crimes that talks about why state and locals aren't better at addressing violence from the far right. And Hidden in Plain Sight, Racism, White Supremacy, and Far-Right Militancy in Law Enforcement. So those are all available for you.
Thank you, Michael. I think another, if you get a chance to put that in the chat tonight as well.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
For our guests, if they would love to catch up on some reading, add that to the 2021 umbrella. I think that'd be amazing as well. And are we doing short introductions first, and then we're going to go into presentations? Or Michael, you're just going to be here on standby to give commentary as well.
Yeah, I am happy to turn it over to Kurtis.
Okay.
And jump in as
all right, gotcha.
as necessary.
All right. Well, Kurtis, you're going to have to hold on just 1 second because we're going to have Shaila Dewan come in, and we're going to go over the boy-girl format. But Shaila, if you're here, please. And I may be saying your name wrong as well. And if she's muted, can you please unmute? Okay, while we get Shaila's audio and everything correct, we're gonna pass things over to Tina. I hope you're ready. You knew I was coming.
I mean, if you're doing this boy girl thing. So my name is Tina Nguyen. I am a reporter at Politico. For the past year, I was covering the White House, the Trump administration specifically, but my specialty ended up being everyone outside of Washington because as if you've been following the Trump administration, you kind of realize that he doesn't listen to anybody in Washington who has expertise or a background in anything. And over the past year, I watched him become more and more reliant on the internet, on people spouting conspiracy theories like QAnon and expressing his affinity for groups like the Proud Boys and saying things like, what is the big deal with QAnon? I think they're just people who really like their country. And once he started buying into that, and once he started leaning into the conspiracy theory that the election was stolen from him and then just rode that for the next 3 months, it seemed inevitable that there would be some sort of activity, protest movement surrounding that, but coming from the MAGA world, Trump supporters, but then also this growing section of conspiracy theorists in QAnon and a growing militia presence. And I was actually at the Capitol when the riots happened. I was stationed outside interviewing people, and I was dealing with the extremist community at the extremist monitoring community at the time. And they were worried that these groups were going to try to mount something at the Capitol. I can go into more of what that experience was like, but it does show the disparity between, you know, the apocalyptic preparation that happened in DC for the Black Lives Matter movement versus the, yeah, you know what, these guys are waving Blue Lives Matter's flag, it's gonna be fine preparation at the Capitol.
So I know our attendees tonight are gonna love to hear of your experience during the riots at the Capitol. So I would love to hear it as well. So I can't wait till we get. I did want to ask, before everything did go down that night, did they already have that in mind that that could happen? That was a possibility, because it seemed, to me, it just seemed like an out of the blue.
If you follow militia movements for the past couple of years, definitely a long time, but for the past couple of years specifically, you've noticed that they have this overwhelming belief that they own these government properties and they must occupy it and take it back. So that's why, like over last summer during the lockdown protest, you saw all of these armed dudes sitting inside the Michigan Capitol, waving their guns around, going like, "Open the government." When the protests were, when the election protests were starting to bubble up, there was more and more discussion in militia groups about attending these events, because these were just open events scheduled by Trump administration allies. And so these groups like the Oath Keepers, the 3%ers, saw these pro-Trump events and went, we're going to go to these too. And in the past couple of months, though, the idea of going to these rallies and making their voices heard has just been exploding. And in the day before the day before the January 6th, there was suddenly this giant outburst of militia forums saying, okay, we're going to go there. We've got some plans. Let's try to make our voices heard. So there was a chance, I gave it about a 40% chance that they would try to pull some sort of insurrection. But I scoped out the security the night before, just because during civil unrest, you should probably have a good sense of like what to do if things go down, how to get out, whether to bring a gas mask, that kind of thing. And I will always be struck by it. There was no security whatsoever. I have been to the Capitol for the inauguration. I was in DC for the Black Lives Matter protests this summer. It was just like a normal day. There were no concrete barricades. There were just metal fences everywhere. It seemed like, I don't know, Coachella in terms of security. And
Right.
and in the morning before the event, I was at the Capitol interviewing people who decided to stay there and try to pressure lawmakers into voting their way. And I will also remember this. I spoke to this one preacher who kept looking at the building and saying, that building belongs to we the people. We ought to be in that building. And they won't let us in. It's a militia ideology that I'm sure Mike will go into. But,
right.
Yeah.
I really feel like I've lived to see it all. Just watching that unfold, and I was like, wow. I don't know what else could surprise me anymore. Maybe a zombie walking across, but to see that.
Yeah, this is the question that I always have, though, is that, and maybe everyone else in the panel would be able to answer this better than I could, is why the heck were there not enough police there? Literally, the militias have a track record of trying to occupy buildings. Why did the Capitol Police just sleep on it.
Right. I mean, as we saw the display in Ferguson, where you have National Guards and military force, just present just during the protests, and we have this with waves and waves of communication saying that something could possibly happen, and we just brushed that off. Wow, that's amazing.
West Side Action Group, were the numbers of people that were there, was that larger than they thought would happen, or was that a pre-planned event?
The event, the crowd estimation in DC is always really weird because it's been so politicized over the past decade that they never really say there's going to be X many people. But the estimates were all over the place. It was either going to be 5,000 people to 40,000 people. When I was there, I estimated maybe 40, like on the higher end of that, 35. But there were so many different groups that had decided to come to this event. Like there were people who were bussed in from official Trump administration ally groups like Turning Point USA. There were Proud Boys coming in. There were militia groups coming in. There were just all garden variety level Trump supporter. But I think they truly did not understand exactly how vicious militia groups could be. And the thing that actually did surprise me was the extent to which QAnon believers decided that this was the quote unquote storm, AKA the prophesized event where they take over the Capitol and purge all the satanic worshiping pedophiles out. But yeah, there was just this sense there that they thought they could control the crowd.
Sorry, I wanted to jump in here because Marlo, you mentioned, and I apologize for acting like someone who has never been seen before. Marlo, you mentioned Ferguson, and we've been looking at this since January 6th. Some of what came out, and there are many, many factors to the security failures that day, but one of them was clearly the Metro Police desire to keep the military and keep the force out of the city because it had been overdone, right, this summer. And if you go all the way back to Ferguson, what you see is, okay, Ferguson, after the after action report says that was too much, you guys were too much. And then you have Charlottesville. And after that, it's like, that was not enough. Where were you guys? Where were the cops? That was not enough. Then you have the summer protests, right. And it's like, that was too much. Feds, get out of here, stop pulling people into unmarked vans. This is not okay, what you're doing here. And so then you pull back again. And if you look at this pattern of swinging back and forth, what's a little interesting is that it's always when the white people are protesting, right, that you are on this side of the pendulum swing, right? And then the next one is going to be, we don't know what's going to happen. It could be an armed mob storming the Capitol, and that's going to be when Black Lives Matter wants to protest again. So, there is a pendulum swing there, but there's also like an odd racial pattern to it. Odd.
And Marlo, if I could jump in, thank you.
Yes, of course, Kurtis.
I appreciate this. And thank you to the students who are tuning in tonight. It's great to be here. I'm a national correspondent for the Los Angeles Times. And just to come back to a little bit about talking about Ferguson, I started at the Times 2 weeks before Michael Brown was murdered by a police officer there in Ferguson. And I went on the ground there, like it was actually my first assignment for the Times. And, just seeing the militarization of police and the force with which they were just, patrolling the streets of Ferguson and also St. Louis, which is, Ferguson's a suburb of St. Louis. And just the whole St. Louis metropolitan area felt like, a real militarized zone. And this is just like Black folks, protesting this man's murder. And to look at, 3 weeks ago today, what took place there at the Capitol and looking at what happened over the summer with, protests in response to George Floyd's murder and Breonna Taylor and, Ahmaud Arbery. You just see you know, I talked to, for a story the day after the insurrection, I talked to Derek Brooks of the NAACP, the president, and he was very blunt. He said, it's white privilege. I mean, it's white privilege that the police didn't prepare for this, that they didn't, you know, they didn't view these, you know, Trump supporters as a threat, as they would view myself or you, Marlo, as we're out on the streets, or as, you know, when I'm out on the streets reporting, or you're out on the streets protesting. I mean, they just didn't view it as a threat. So, I mean, just really seeing this dynamic these last, you know, 6 months from, you know, I was on the ground in Minneapolis, I was on the ground in Louisville, you know, it just seeing, you know, what took place there with, you know, just force. I mean, when you just have some Black kids, Latino kids on the streets, just, you know, with signs walking up and down the streets, and you have, you know, cops with batons and riot gear, and then you just see this contrast to 3 weeks ago. It's, I mean, it is what it is. It's white privilege. It is. I mean, you call it what it is, and that's something that, you know, Derek Brooks told me for the piece, but yeah, no, I look forward to tonight's conversation, and thank you so much for having me. Again, I'm a correspondent at the LA Times. I write a lot of, you know, news features, profiles, narratives on race, criminal justice reform, income inequality, the Second Amendment. You know, before that, I covered the 2016 campaign and the rise of Donald Trump, you know, his presidency, and traveled the country writing features on the campaign. So yeah, I've kind of seen, you know, from the MAGA rallies to, you know, the Black Lives Matter protests. I've kind of seen both these last, you know, 6 years. Thank you.
Kurtis, along with that, and all the panelists, I'm very interested in, once it did get out of control, the reaction of the officers seemed to be just hold it down. You know, let's just hold it down. Let's calm down. The one officer was in the Capitol Hall, and he was saying, you know, it's time for you guys to get out of here. And they said, well, can you take a picture of me? He said, no, I can't take a picture of you. And they would do it. So my thing is once it did get out of control, if it had been a group of Black folks, I guarantee you there would have been a lot more gunshot.
Oh, no doubt.
And so that's what I just want to hear some discussion on that part of it also. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
thank you. Go ahead, Kurtis.
Yeah, I mean, for that piece that ran, you know, the day after, I mean, we talked to, you know, activists all around the country. I had contacts in Minneapolis, and in, you know, my other colleagues had contacts in Kenosha, and we talked to folks and just, you know, got their perspective on it, and they were very blunt and, you know, accurate in what they said. I mean, if there was this planned, you know, thousands of Black people who were going to be on the mall, Black and Latino people on the mall, it would have been a different presence. There would have, and I think that we've seen that as a fact and rooted in truth with the protests over the summer and the years before.
And if I can break in, I think it's a real mistake to look at the January 6th assault on the Capitol as a sui generis event. It was not. This was only the latest in a series of far-right violence committed in public across the country. And I'll push back against the idea that law enforcement was trying to find a happy medium between allowing white supremacists to attack and kill people and brutalizing Black and brown protesters, right? Because what you saw in Portland every night for almost the entire year was police in force brutalizing the community that came out to protest. And when the far-right militants would come out in broad daylight and attack those same protesters, the police would stand back and do nothing until the far-right militants left. And then they would come in and brutalize the same people that the far-right militants were protesting. And this has gone on for years, right? This isn't something that just happened. Before Charlottesville, there was Huntington Beach, there was Sacramento, there was Anaheim, where the police actively used their powers to go after the anti-racist protesters, not to inhibit the far-right militants who were actually stabbing and shooting and killing people. This happened in Seattle. It happened in Berkeley twice. It happened in Portland long before Charlottesville happened, and then it recurred all the way across the country and is continuing. I don't know how many of you have looked at the way, you know, again, the FBI is treating this as if these people just came out of nowhere, all of a sudden showed up at the Capitol, and you know, they keep quoting them saying they got caught up in it, rather than quoting their multiple statements before saying exactly what they were going to do, right? These people communicate with the public. They have open channels. You don't have to have some dark web chat room to find them saying they were going to attack the Capitol. They were going to attack members of Congress. And only 2 weeks before, they had attacked the Oregon State Legislature, attacking police officers, breaching the doors, attacking journalists. This is all planned activities that they had been engaged in. And if you look at the charging document against one of the Proud Boys, the FBI has 2 paragraphs in that. The person, Joseph Biggs, is only charged with January 6 events. But there are 2 odd paragraphs appearing in a criminal complaint that you never see. Paragraphs 6 and 7 discuss events that didn't take place on January 6 and don't specifically mention Joseph Biggs at all. So it's very odd to have that kind of information in a complaint, because all the government has to do is put the information that proves the charges that they want to lay. But what it says is there were 2 events prior, one, the Million MAGA March in November in DC, and then a pro-Trump rally in December. It described them as peaceful First Amendment demonstrations that the Proud Boys attended. Now, Tina, I'm sure you were probably in DC at the time, and I don't think anybody who was there would describe them as peaceful. And certainly the Proud Boys were at the front of the line as far as committing the violence. So the idea that the FBI would be recreating this history even after January 6th in a charging document, right? That's the agent signed that as an affidavit that said swearing that was true when it's demonstrably false. And I think it shows that the FBI is now trying to pretend January 6th happened out of the blue, rather than acknowledging that they had plenty of warning that this was going to happen, and they let it happen.
Yeah, jumping off of that point really quickly, the Proud Boys ideology, I don't know how much people have gone into it in this chat, so sorry if I'm repeating things that like people know, but one of the ways that the Proud Boys operates is that they deliberately are reactionary, in that they go out and they demonstrate, but they are hoping that they can capture some leftist force attacking them. Antifa, Black Lives Matter particularly, the talking point is the left is so violent, so we're here to protect you because, you know, the right won't. I mean, not the right, law enforcement won't. And honestly, that's the heart of militia ideology, that law enforcement and political structures are so bad that we've got to take up arms in order to fight back. But the one thing that always really sticks out to me with law enforcement and people investigating extremists is that these groups they will turn on law enforcement. So they can run around waving Blue Lives Matter flags, but if they feel like law enforcement, police, etc., are trying to actively hinder their own activity, they will turn on them instantly. And I mean, that's why you honestly don't like seeing a militia member get charged for, you know, beating up a cop or something. It's way more obvious that they think this way, and I still do not understand. There's like definitely some, I don't know if I can speak fully to why the police don't like refuse to acknowledge this, but that's a thing I can definitely point out. That part, the anti-law enforcement aspect of militia groups, Proud Boys, etc., just like right over people's heads.
The misdemeanor offenses alone was just a slap in the face to protesters who's been out here recently. And I was just recently reading a book, and we're going to speak on that in a few weeks to come on our show. But it was called Set the Night on Fire, LA in the 60s. And even protesters in the 60s were getting slapped with felonies for protesting. And I remember one instance where, you know, the beatings, the nonviolent rallies and things like that had gotten so bad to where the idea presented itself to deploy college students and high school students to hope that, you know, they won't get attacked, you know, in that form. But these were even elementary school, middle school kids were out there protesting, and dogs and water hoses were still used on them while they were protesting. This was in the 60s in Los Angeles. So, you know, the youth was never, the Black youth, the minority youth was never cared for in that manner, in the way that they treat the elderly, minority, and the people who's able to get out there and protest and fight for their rights and fight for equality across the board. You know, and then we get a prime example of, you know, the nation's capital being attacked, and to be slapped with misdemeanors and you know, just small offenses. Even in one instance at a Black Lives Matter protest where a young white kid shot protesters, and he's out walking around freely with "I'm free" t-shirt on. You know, like these things are slaps in the face to Black lives across the nation, and it further proves the systemic racism in these ploys that they try to employ on these communities, on these minority communities, that we really don't have a seat at this table, and our lives really don't matter, and we get beat down for even speaking the words Black Lives Matter. Just a few days ago, someone asked me why, because I have a tag on my on one of my profiles that says BLM, and he said, why does Black Lives Matter? Why not all lives matter? You can feel how you want to feel. That's just how I feel. Black lives are the most non-cared for. But he really was offensive just coming into the conversation. He was offended that my page said BLM on it. So this is the type of, and this is just a random person. So I can see that ideology going across the nation, across the board, and you know, times 1,000 when it comes to attacking an attack on the nation's capital. But that's just speaking on some of the experiences I've seen and things like that recently. But before we speak again, before someone jumps in, I want to give Shaila, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, a chance to
Shaila,
introduce.
it's Shaila.
Shaila, I
Thanks
knew
for
it.
asking.
I knew it. I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself because you came in a little late. The guests to know you. I want the guests to know you as well,
Sure.
because your insight is going to matter as well.
Okay, I'm Shaila Dewan. I'm originally from Houston. I work for the New York Times. I have done a number of different beats at the Times, but many of them have been justice or policing focused. And in my most recent incarnation, I write about criminal justice issues nationally. And in the past, what has it been, 3 weeks? I've been looking very closely at the law enforcement aspect of the response to the Capitol siege.
And if you could you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, well, one thing I wanted to bring up earlier, and that everyone's brought up some such great points. You know, I just wanted to name, because it just drives me a little bit crazy. I fill my Twitter feed with a lot of conservatives on purpose, so I'm not like in a bubble and I'm listening to all kinds of voices. But there is an equivalency going on. Like, this was not a protest. I just want to name that. I know everybody gets that, but this what happened on January 6th was not a protest. It was a violent act, and that is very distinct from what we see when people are going out in the streets to express their views. A second aspect of this that we haven't really talked about is just that I also just want to name, and it's also glaringly obvious, but we know that law enforcement was to some degree paralyzed by the participation of the president in this event, by the fact that these were his invited guests to Washington. He told them to come there, and the Capitol is the people's house and has always had to balance the security concern of keeping it as an open space where the public's business is conducted. And, and in this instance, the public was invited, condoned, encouraged by the person at the top who's the boss of all of these people. So, and then we also know that, you know, part of this was like a failure to anticipate the threat. We've talked about that a little bit. And the Capitol Police, we know, has a huge diversity problem. They have never had a Black chief, which is unusual in this day and age for a force of that size. There's plenty of talent out there. And they have had constant complaints from Black employees and women for years and years and years that they've never fixed. Now, how does that translate into what happened on January 6th? You don't have enough diversity at the top. You don't have people who can say, this is a real threat. This is something to be taken seriously. We know you just don't have that additional voice or voices at the top. So those are some of the things that I've been looking at. Just like you said, Marlo, like the the response would have been different. Well, I talked to I think he was like a 4-decade veteran of the department who was Black. And he said, you know, when Farrakhan showed up just with 5 associates, they had the SWAT team ready to go in the basement. You know, their anticipation of violence was way out of proportion. So I think that is a factor here as well.
Thank you. I want to speak to the attendees tonight. If any of you all had a chance to protest in the recent year, could you post that in the Q&A section just to talk about your experience while protesting and things that you saw, and then as well as how did you feel protesting during this time? It wasn't I mean, it was a Black Lives Movement protest, but we had all lives out there united for this cause. So I would love to hear if any of our attendees had a chance to protest, and how did you feel, and what did you witness during that time as well. But thank you, Shaila, for the introduction. I do want to, Stan is here. Stan just jumped in there. But let me introduce you guys to Stan Futch. This is my friend. This is a fellow community leader. Stan is also the president of San Bernardino's own West Side Action Group. And Stan's got to tell you more about you know, how they were organized and what they do for the community as well. But it's someone that I very much look up to, and I'm very proud to call my friend, and he's an active host on the show as well. So Stan, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The West Side Action Group was developed because in 1972, a new high school opened up. And during the high school, the African-American students were bused to the back of the school, while the white students were bused to the front of the school. And so mothers got together and protested, you know, the way they were treating the Black students. And the fathers decided, you know, we can't let just the women fight the battle for us kids. And so West Side Political Action Group was formed. And then over the years, it's changed to the West Side Action Group. And so we've been community active since '72. Next year will be our 50th anniversary, and we're excited about that. But we have a community forum where people come every Monday, and this is one of the longest running organizations in the San Bernardino Inland Empire area. Every morning, Monday morning, except for holidays, we meet, and people come with their issues, their concerns, and we take them in, and we try to resolve them with the powers that be. And sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not, but we want things better for our community and our people. And that's what we do with the West Side Action Group. And I'm really glad to be here, and I'm really excited about this panel being here, because I've been watching, and I was just so taken aback by the non-action of peace officers, including the Black officer who became the hero, who led them to the wrong place and became the hero. He had these people just coming at him. And I know I've seen policemen many times when people are attacking them, they don't just stand there. And he had his hand on his gun, but the pulling of guns was only done by the individuals in plain clothes. I mean, when that girl got shot, she was shot by plainclothes. These are the last resort, and so I'm just really fascinated, not by the fact that the way they treated the whites versus the blacks, but the mentality behind it. And that's what I just want to hear so much more on that. The mentality behind these white officers or these police officers, even though they were overwhelmed, they continually didn't exert force. And I will say this, personally, I think some of them were in an awkward position. They were terrified. There were too many people, just too many people, and they were overwhelmed. But at the same time, I think if African Americans were overwhelming them, they would find a way to take them down, and that didn't happen. And it's just Tina, thank you so much for giving another perspective. And that perspective, I was surprised. You said they were guests of the president, and that I didn't see it. I never saw that. And you're right, they were invited by him, and maybe that was a major control thing that was in place.
I mean, I think there's a lot we could say about the way the police handled it. And I think there's also a lot of debate going on within the ranks about how it was handled. Some officers are definitely felt underprepared and overwhelmed, terrified, and that they did not want to escalate the situation. Other officers strongly disagree with that. They're like, what were you thinking? Like, this is when the guns come out. You had a Bearcat, you didn't spray tear gas. They should have put a line of gas. You know, I mean, that there's so much more that they could have done. And why they didn't do it is going to be a subject of multiple investigations for many months to come, I think. You know, you do see like the one officer who acted to shoot the rioter as she was trying to go through the window, which would have basically breached the last barrier between the rioters and the lawmakers. You know, he exercised great restraint. He fired one. I know we can all think of people who 41 bullets, 38 bullets, I mean, who were met with a very different response. So I mean, I think it's going to be a situation where each officer in that will have a different answer as to why force wasn't used, and it is not going to be a simple answer.
And there was an early report that the Capitol Police were told that they were not allowed to use lethal force before the event. I don't know if that turned out to be true or not, but we've seen this at previous protests where the far right groups come out heavily armed, that the police will say, we were afraid because they were better armed than we were, or at least as armed. That came out a lot in Charlottesville. But obviously that's a poor reason to let people throw our democracy into turmoil through the force of violence.
Yeah, I mean, it's also a fundamental problem with having an armed citizenry where the people, you know, everyone is allowed to carry guns, but the only ones that we find actually threatening are Black people. The response is so different. I mean, Philando Castile had a licensed handgun in his car and told the cop, you know, so this is, I think there will, I'm not going to be that optimistic, but there will be some examination of the repercussions of having in our country.
Two things that stood out for me was, one, I had never seen so many backpacks in my life. And if you're talking about people being up in arms, what's in those backpacks? That's my first question. And then the other thing that was amazing to me was how quick the chief stepped down. It was 24 hours. He had no thought about, you know, and my question was was he liable for some of the actions that were taking place? I mean, ultimately it falls on him, but in a personal know, has there been any feedback on him personally?
Stan, I can't speak directly to that, but I can, and maybe some of the other panelists could. You know, one thing that we also reported, you know, in those days after, and other outlets have reported as well, I mean, is the fact that a lot of these, you know, rioters were ex-law enforcement, current law enforcement, ex-military. You know, so when you talk about those backpacks, I mean, I think from visuals we saw, I mean, some of these guys were carrying zip ties and, you know, mace and, you know, who knows what else in these backpacks, but there's a level of, you know, training that these people had, and, you know, they you know, kind of, there was planning as well. You know, I think that's clear through some of these, you know, social media chats that we've seen, and different posts that some of the panelists have alluded to, you know, the different forms of communication. But I think that is something to really, you know, as these reports come out, and, you know, the investigations into this, you know, insurrection and attack on the Capitol is the ex-military, you know, training and law enforcement training, and how these right-wing groups are, you know, appealing to disgruntled ex-law enforcement. I mean, I think that's the story, you know, that we really focused on as well, is a piece that looked at, you know, what draws someone to a right-wing group. Obviously, I mean, you probably have certain, you know, bigoted thoughts maybe, but it's also, you know, this feeling of, you know, out of the military, and, you know, this wanting of community and group, and, you know, there's plenty of other things, don't get me wrong, you could do besides join a right-wing group, but you know, like I said, a lot of these people did have ex-military training. The woman who was shot and killed, you know, was a veteran from San Diego, and yeah, I mean, this is you know, something that'll definitely be debated in these months and months ahead.
And as far as the chief, you asked about the chief. I mean, it's abundantly clear that the biggest failures here were in leadership. This was not a big problem. I mean, I would not put the bulk of the blame here at the rank and file officers' feet. No matter what you saw on the video, and it was bad. This was a failure to prepare, failure to train, failure to have enough people on the ground, failure to have a backup plan. I mean, and that's all leadership. So, you know, whether he's saying, oh, I asked for the National Guard and they told me no, whether that turns out to be true or not, there's been some question raised as to how serious his request was. You know, it's those people who are making those decisions at the top that failed on this day.
You know, I think until we get better evidence, using the word complicity is probably overstating what we know, but certainly law enforcement didn't need the National Guard, right? I lived in DC for a long time. You see the way the Park Police rousted the Occupy movement, right? I mean, the law enforcement has plenty of tools to control a crowd in DC and plenty of experience doing it. So the idea that it was just the National Guard not being there that prevented them from doing a better job of protecting one building, I think it flies in the face of this history. And I think we have to wrestle with how politicized law enforcement has become since 9/11, right? Our counterterrorism training was highly racist, right? Painting Muslim communities as the suspect community for terrorism. Our immigration policy is highly racialized. And, you know, many of these militia groups rebranded themselves as border militia after 9/11, and were very much working hand in glove with law enforcement authorities. So this familiarity between these far-right militants and law enforcement and the military goes very deep and very high, right? You know, the FBI is still a very white male organization. And if you look at the way white males voted in this country, you're going to see that there is a disproportionate amount of support for President Trump. and understanding how that dynamic works, because what we have to understand about white supremacist militancy is we tend to look at it like this extremist movement. It's something over on the fringe. You know, we have to figure out why somebody would adopt those ideas and be attracted to that without recognizing this goes through our culture, right? There were members of Congress who were taking photographs with these people the day before and had invited the Proud Boys and other groups out with them while they campaign, right? We have the President of the United States. We have members of state houses all across the country. In Oregon, there's an allegation that a member actually let the militia or the far-right militant group in. So we have to understand that this is much more part of our society than we want to talk about. But that's what we're going to have to address if we really want to end the appeal that these groups have for the more violent people. Because, you know, a lot of the people I was undercover with, they couldn't spell Hitler. They didn't know what National Socialism was. They wanted to be violent. And this was a club that let them be violent and appreciated their violence and directed their violence. And that's what you see with a lot of these militant groups. They have criminal records, many of them, right? They're not unknown to law enforcement, but somehow if they show up at a protest, they're friends of the police, is astonishing to me. As Tina was saying earlier, you know, that they don't seem to recognize that these groups kill police, including over the last year, right? The killing of a DHS security guard in Oakland and a sheriff's deputy in California. And yet there's still this affinity is really hard to explain without recognizing that it's an ideological affinity where they're on the same team or see themselves on the same team and therefore aren't interested in inhibiting their violence because it targets the people that they see as the enemy, and that the President of the United States at the time, Donald Trump, identified as the enemy, right? It's the Antifa group. It's the group that's out there protesting your activities and the president's activities that is our shared enemy and deserves that kind of violence.
Michael, do you think that the events of January 6th, do you think that they make it harder to push this stuff under the rug, to maintain this sort of willful amnesia, the non-enforcement of anti-militia laws? Do you see any? I mean, when I was watching January 6th, and I was actually scared, and I said to my partner, please come here and watch this with me. And he said, you know what, this is good because they can't hide anymore. Like, it's very clear who they are now. And I wonder how long that lasts, or if it lasts, or what you think.
Well, I don't think I could remain in this business if I wasn't an optimist. So I can hope. But I had that hope after the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, when a lot of the same rhetoric was being used, a lot of the same discussion about how they were going to prioritize these cases. But at the same time, I'm watching public violence by white supremacists and far-right militants happening across the country that the police are standing there and looking away from. So I'm concerned, again, the way that the federal authorities are framing this as a one-time event, right? That even in not just in their rhetoric, but in the charging documents, they're suggesting everything before January 6th was peaceful happiness and community, and all of a sudden this event got out of hand. And you're even hearing already them saying, again through unnamed sources, so I don't know how valid it is, but that they may not charge all the people who assaulted the Capitol. And as somebody already mentioned, a lot of the charges are misdemeanors. They found felonies to charge the Disrupt J20 protesters with when a window got broken, right? A Starbucks window getting broken is slightly down the list of why we need to charge 230 people with felonies than a major assault on the Capitol. So it's unclear how the Justice Department can't find charges for people who beat police officers. And what's astonishing to me is the arrests so far heavily focus on the people who were, violating the restricted access rules, rather than the dozens of people, if not hundreds, who we can see on tape beating police officers. And I think we have to be very aggressive as Americans to make sure that our elected officials are held responsible for getting all this out, because I think we will see a lot more complicity, a lot more information that these agencies had available to them, even as they were choosing not to prepare for what was being planned in plain sight.
Yeah, thank Michael. And that's a good point. Jump in there, Tina.
Yeah, to hop off your point about the political energy that you need to keep law enforcement held accountable. I'm gonna rain on your parade real quick there. It seems like among Republicans who initially thought, oh my God, this is unacceptable, there is now a desire to sweep those January 6th under the rug and blame it on either Antifa agitators. I'm seeing people as prominent as Tucker Carlson saying, why is it that people think that QAnon believers are bad? I have a steady diet of right-wing media, and there is a bunch of people who are saying that, oh God, who are these militia people? We've never heard of them. Are these lies that the leftist media has made up? So not only is there strict denial that this happened, there is a push right now and to frame any sort of alarmism at any sort of alarm that people who are not playing for this team are saying of why are you not charging these people? They're framing it as paranoid alarmism on par with the early days of the Trump administration, where people were worried about the Mueller investigation. That's how much resistance there is in the Republican Party to holding anyone accountable for this.
Wow. We have a question from Daniel Holt, and he wants to know the makeup of the police department, District of Columbia law enforcement. How does it work? And I know there's the Capitol Police, there's the DC Police, and then there's what? Anyone know how the makeup of the department is?
You mean the demographic makeup? Is that the question?
Yeah, how many law enforcement teams are there?
Oh, there is about 40 different law enforcement agencies in Washington, D.C. So there is a coordination issue, definitely. I mean, just on the mall itself, you have the Park Police, the Capitol Police, MPD, which is the Metro Police. And they have, jurisdictional lines, and there's even like a zoo police, I think.
Yeah.
And as far as Capitol Police specifically, they're so secretive that you cannot actually find out basic information like the demographics of the department, which most departments put on their website. The Capitol Police is not subject to any kind of open records laws. They don't have to answer your FOIA requests. So there's a lot we don't know about the Capitol Police specifically, other than that it's big and has a lot of money.
And Kurtis, is another question, and it says, I was talking to a police officer the other day. He said those who attacked the Capitol were BLM and Antifa infiltrators. And so anyone who wants to speak on it, just step up.
Yeah, I think that kind of stuff is just dangerous, right? And how do you, Tina was just saying that, I mean, there are Republicans who are saying, this, and right-wing media saying that, these were Antifa and like you said, Black Lives Matter protesters. I mean, it's just bullshit. I mean, it is, and I don't think that, it's this attempt at one of this both sidesing of this issue. And it's just, I think that's just dangerous to do. And I think that, with this, you kind of just really have to stick to, the fact, clearly stick to the facts of it. But it's just, I mean, it's this kind of, rhetoric is dangerous to come out with, because I mean, it clearly, is not accurate. And it's this false balance that's taking place, or false equivalency. And, it's an attempt at that, at least. Right. And yeah, ultimately it's just very, dangerous. How do you, Tina, are you guys like reporting this out? Like what at Politico, what's kind of, you know, I'm just very interested because I'm not in Washington, and like, you know, what's kind of the model that you guys are using? Are you going with this, or like what kind of, like, what's the process?
I'm sorry, could you clarify the question? The process of
like, I mean, just like, do you see this as like dangerous rhetoric? I mean, I don't want to like, you know, put you on the spot with like, you know, just asking your opinion, but it's just kind of, I think for the students to understand, like, you know, when people are coming out with these kind of comments, it's just kind of like, how do we, you know, as journalists report that?
Yeah, it's a tricky balance for sure. I mean, these guys do occupy half of Washington. God, when I say it like that way, when I say it like that, it does sound like I'm worried about access. That's not what I'm saying. It's more along the lines of like, at Politico, we focus primarily on the news of politics, of the way that people are maneuvering in Congress, in the White House, behind the scenes on Capitol Hill, in the military, through policy. And we capture the energy of where caucuses are going and who's entering and who's leaving. So we don't particularly say, oh, Matt Gaetz is saying this, so much as it is that we dig into the calculation behind him saying that, or the conversations that are happening behind the scenes when it comes to Mitch McConnell making a move in Congress to get rid of like XYZ policy, or to shut down another policy. So at least from our perspective, we focus on the decision-making process behind what they say, and not just simply go, oh, he said it, Matt Gaetz said that it was Antifa, so we're just gonna dutifully record it and put it on the internet.
That's one of the biggest problems is, you know, and Trump came out with himself, false news, and the person that was pushing more false news than anybody seemed to be him. And it's just, it's the most amazing thing. I have a question here. Dean, he said, Stan, on the question of use of force, the one time someone fired a weapon caused everyone in the section of the room to back away quickly. And I find that is the observation troubling that even when force was used, they have seemingly apologized for it. And I'm so glad Dean asked that question, because that's the truth. That's how I feel. It's like, the one time you cleared a room with force was the last time you used force. And had you maybe used force earlier in the day, it wouldn't have gotten so, you know, escalating it, de-escalating, how do you do it?
Well, I guess since I'm the only one who's been in law enforcement, you know, this again is part of the frustration in talking about these issues, because, you know, the police pretend they don't know how to de-escalate when it's a Black Lives Matter protest or Standing Rock water protectors, and they have to bring out all their military toys and tactics, and yet they completely understand how to de-escalate when it involves these other groups. And I think that makes some of the advocacy difficult, though, because I don't want to see the Capitol Police laying down fire across the 1,000 protesters out in front of the Capitol, right? We want them acting in a more restrained manner, as they did in DC, except to the point that there was a breaching of the building where it was actually putting people in harm's way and actual violence against police officers. But, you know, I wish the federal and local and state police in Portland acted with a little more restraint, where there what we were seeing was much less threatening behavior before they brought out their big toys. So I think a lot of that has to do with, again, this politicization of law enforcement, where they felt, and so far have been allowed to commit wanton violence against Black Lives Matter activists and these others, and aren't held responsible at all. I mean, the grievous injuries that occurred, and really it's just dumb luck that more people weren't killed during those protests. certainly not for any inaction by the police. So, but again, what I want them to do is be less violent, up until they got to and the Capitol Police actually got in trouble for this during an anti-war rally back during the Bush administrations, where they had set up a skirmish line during an anti-war rally. Again, these rallies aren't nearly bringing the kind of violence that the far right groups bring to these events. But there was some people kind of pressing against the police line. So the Capitol Police chief at the time had them move back 20 yards. So you saw things getting kind of testy, and all of a sudden the police just abandoned that space. And you saw the crowd get kind of confused and eventually get their bearings again and come out, and they kept backing up right up until the Capitol. And then they just protected the building, and the protesters tore up the bushes and spray painted the steps and had their fun, but nobody was hurt. And that's the way the police should react, right? We as he said at the time, we replanted the bushes and got rid of the paint within 24 hours. That the government should be able to accept those losses, but somehow they can't when the protest is something that challenges police behavior itself, like the Black Lives Matter protests.
Can I just jump in? I am, like you, Michael, a former law enforcement officer, and I was for 18 years in Los Angeles. And my department has come under all sorts, or my former department has come under all sorts of court orders to break up the gangs. And you probably know which department I'm talking about. And it has a leader right now who is Latino, right, who is more of a white supremacist than any other police chief. And I've been through, Davis and Gates and all of them. But this guy is just defying the Board of Supervisors. He's defying, and in fact, the new administration in Washington is opening up an investigation of the LA Sheriff's Department now, because they have been for decades and decades, they have been just unresponsive in terms of how they patrol people, their chokeholds and all of that stuff. So I think the very question that we're asking in this series, and especially today, is not the question, but what do we do about white supremacy? Because that is exactly what went on. And I think I was reluctant to use the term white supremacy years ago because students were, in an uproar because, I was accusing them of being in the Klan or whatever. But I think many of them saw on January 6th what is going on, and what we can see very, very clearly now, that white supremacy is not hanging someone from a tree as much as it is being able to do what you want, go through the courts and get a slap on the wrist. And I think that from that standpoint, and from what I have studied through the years, I don't think it's going to make a whole lot of difference if we switch all the whites in the police departments to all Black or all Latino, because there are some departments, for example, East LA Sheriff's Station, where Latinos are predominant in terms of the demographics, yet they're going out and doing some bad stuff. Those officers are going out and doing some bad stuff. So I think my question is, just from what you all are, your experiences, what do we do to combat white supremacy in the police departments? Because it's hurting people. And by the way, Kurtis, welcome to LA. They welcomed you to LA and they sent you to a war zone, right?
Well, that's the thing that you bring up. All of my stories these last 6 years, I've been outside of LA, but you bring up a good point, Mary, with what's going on with the sheriff's department here in Los Angeles. I think that's one of the biggest stories for our paper right now, is what's going on with Villanueva and this civil rights investigation that just came about from Becerra's office. but like you said, I mean, to deal with white supremacy in the ranks, I mean, of course, like bringing in just this kind of a head that is Black, a chief that's Black. I mean, that doesn't root out the institutional racism at within the department, within the ranks. I mean, I think that goes for anything, a newsroom or a doctor's office. I mean, just bringing in people doesn't root out the problem, and I think that's something that law enforcement are grappling with quite a bit these last few years, that because it's coming to the forefront. You have police officers who are coming forward and speaking of rampant racism within the ranks, and not just the community, which has suffered from racist policing for decades, from Jim Crow on, or even before that, Reconstruction to Jim Crow and then on. So yeah, this is definitely something that's being discussed. I mean, I don't have the answers of like how you root that out, but it's just like putting a Black person or a Latino person as the head of the department. I mean, that doesn't change the culture within.
I think that's a really important point sorry, go ahead, Stan.
Well, there's gangs inside of police departments, there's gangs inside of all these different organizations. And so when you're dealing with gangs inside of supposedly good organizations, that's a tough one to clean up. And there's Latin gangs, and I have a friend, and she said the worst thing about the Latins that come to America and do well is that for some reason Latins pray that they don't turn corrupt because there's so much corruption in the countries they came from. And so they said they hope it's not a mental thing. She said she hoped it wasn't a mental thing, but she says, I see it all the time where people make it and then become corrupt. And so it's not just Latins, it's corruption in all races. But it's tough, Mary, because there's gangs inside of these organizations that shouldn't be there. And
absolutely. And I think, though, that we did have a question or a comment that said we have, as this panel that we've been putting on since May, that we are calling for the end of policing. And that is just not the case. The case is that if we've got to scrap the entire LA Sheriff's Department and bring in new people, then so be it. That we want to, and defunding does not mean we take away all the funds. It simply means that we're going to redirect those funds to somebody else, or to some, like social work and nursing and that kind of thing, taking police out of schools, etc. So I would hope that our audience can keep their ears and eyes open and their hearts to hear the pain of people who are, the Black police officer who was fired because she slapped a protester. Black police officer, I don't know if she was Capitol or what, but she slapped a protester, and so she was fired immediately. So what does that say to you? What does that say about racism in policing? And that's what we want to stop, because the guys I used to work with, many of them were Vietnam veterans, and they would roll in there like they were still at war. And nobody ever corrected them about that. Nobody ever said, no, we are going to protect and serve in South Central LA the same way we do in Malibu. Because it's a huge jurisdiction, right? And nobody ever said that to them. And so they felt free to go and to abuse people in the community. And they're still doing it.
Mm-hmm. My wife was a military police officer, and when she got out, the LAPD wanted her bad. They recruited her, and she went there, and just what you said, Mary, when she got there, she saw that type of action, and she said, I don't want to be a part of this. This isn't policing, this is war, and she didn't want to be a part of that, so she moved on to other things. But yeah, you're right, that kind of thing happens. I got a question here from McLover, And he says, Mr. Brooks, Mr. Futch, and Mr. Lee, I'm interested in hearing your perspective when people say, oh, I'm so surprised by the police response when a person of color, I've known there are 2 Americans from day one, and people remind me of that fact all the time. Oh, I am a person of color, and they remind me of that all the time. If a person of color is protesting, SWAT is called. If a white person with a pipe bomb and zip ties, let's wait. How do you, I want to know how you process that.
It's, for myself, it's just a, it's honestly just a never ending display of what the people before me have been through and what my generation continue to go through. I was just thinking maybe in a decade and a half when we're reading about this in the school's textbooks that they finally, you know, worded correctly or what it really was, what really happened, and you know, not just write it for America's sake, but write it for the moment that it is. I feel like we're witnessing a modern day civil war. We're witnessing civil war on this country's land. And the most we can do right now is step up to the plate, is answer that call to service, is to protect your neighbors and your community, is to stand up and get out there on the forefront and become the young leader that you really are. What used to be cool, you know, what used to be the jock, the new cool now is to be woke. The new cool now is to have your guard up and to protect everyone that's around you, not the people that I just know, but anyone I see, anyone I come across. I want to share the information I know with you so that you hopefully share it with others as well. I want to make sure that resources are being spent in where they need to be spent. I want to make sure that information is being delivered. And that's my only focus. I remember growing up, I always wanted to be a celebrity or hugely famous. Now, I just want to serve. I just want to hoard not hoard, but just share resources and information with everyone I can that it may prevent another person of color from becoming the next hashtag or the next this watered down sense of death and murder that we see scrolling up and down our social media. It's like, this is okay. You know, these are the things that we had to pick up a newspaper to see these things growing up. Now, with your little computer in your pocket, a death is so every other post now. You're so I know I'm missing the word. I know you guys probably have it. We're so taken from what that really means to see those things. See someone get their neck stood on for that amount of time till they pass out and no longer conscious. I take these things and I want to make sure that the person, everyone around me, my family and my peers and my community never have to go through this again.
Kurtis?
And Marlo, I mean, this is something that, you know, brothers know about growing up. You know, you know that this happens. You know that you know, cops will harass you. Cops, you know, kill brothers unarmed. You hear these stories. I know I did growing up, and it's like one of those things that's, like you said. I mean, you would read about it maybe, or, you know, just hear about it from family and in the community. But then, you know, now everyone has a cell phone. Everyone, you know, this is being recorded. It's much more in front of us. And I mean, as a Black journalist, I mean, you see, like, this is there's a clear double standard in what took place on January 6th and what took place, you know, in Ferguson in 2014, in, you know, you name it, Kenosha, Minneapolis. You know, there's a clear double standard, and you know, my job, I feel like, is to write with authority and say that. I mean, that's the truth behind that there is no doubt a double standard. And if, you know, if anyone, you know, needed to see a clear example, then you just look at what took place there at the Capitol. But yeah, I mean, this is something that, you know, as a Black reporter, you know, it's terrible to see. I mean, when I'm out there on the streets, you know, reporting or, you know, marching in Louisville, and, you know, you see the 9 o'clock curfew rolls around, and, you know, there's a few kids on the block still, and, you know, cops just come out with the zip ties and throw the slabs on them right away. Like, what? Like, what are we, like, really? You know, these are kids out here. And you know, you see that the fact that there is a double standard, and it's you know, it's been going on a long time, a long time, and you know, it's just now being recorded more.
And I think that's a great point. And so much of our discussion around these issues, and one of the questions in the chat is that we have, you know, from TV cop shows or whatever, we have a very different idea of what we think the police do versus what they actually do. You know, and the question in the chat was, you know, if defund the police was successful, how would we protect ourselves from white supremacists? Is if the police are protecting the communities from white supremacist violence, right? I mean, the FBI can't even tell you how many people white supremacists kill every year, because they don't even bother to count the bodies. You know, if you look at violent crime in this country, which is what you would think in a perfect world, that's where police would focus, half of the violent crime in the country goes unsolved. That includes almost 40% of the murders and more than 64% of reported rapes, right? So we know many rapes aren't reported, just the way many hate crimes aren't reported, because the people in those communities know the police don't care and won't help them. So, you know, when we look at the way that the discussion was framed, you know, coming down from the top of our government, former President Trump and the Attorney General, demonizing Antifa, you know, you have to understand what that is, anti-fascism. That's what the community was doing to protect itself from these far-right militants who were coming into the community to harm them and to harm the community. And we have to start framing things that way so that people will understand, because it was far too easy for Donald Trump to label Antifa, that even police intelligence reports were talking about clashes between Antifa and anti-Antifa forces. Kind of forgetting their math skills about the double negative. No, you're talking about fascists, right? If your enemies are anti-fascists, you're fascist. But of course, you know, their labeling campaign worked, and people are confused about what Antifa is, and, you know, go into this conversation as these are these far-right militants who get attacked by Antifa. No, this is an old strategy. You know, there's a reason why they go to Parkland, to Charlottesville, to cities where they know their message is unwelcome, is to draw out the opposition that they can attack. We knew this in law enforcement in the 90s. I don't know how they've forgotten that. So we know who the instigator of the violence is. That's where the focus needs to be. But unfortunately, the entire conversation hasn't kept those facts together. And what we have to do is understand that community protects community. And it's our responsibility to make sure that our local representatives know that we want those community services, because that's ultimately what will keep us safer.
Great segue, Mike, because my answer to the question is accountability. I think everybody that was involved in the issues, those that accuse the election of being false, and the congressman that stood out and battled it even after the Capitol being attacked, I think they should all be held accountable for their actions. I think that's I think the police officers, the rioters and the protesters, they should all be held, everyone should be held accountable for what they do. And I think one of the questions on here was how the identification of people. And I think that there was some good identification of people, because when people went to the airports to get on airplanes, they were put on the no-fly list. And so there was some accountability. And so I think that was a big thing. That was I was surprised when I heard that people were in the airport crying because they couldn't get home because they were put on the no-fly list because they were at the Capitol raising hell. And there was a lady on the floor crying like a baby. But she wasn't crying when she was raising hell. She wasn't crying when she was in the Capitol screaming and hollering. And another man also said, he wanted to know how he's gonna get home. And one person even went so far as to say that he was being treated like a black man because he was put on the no-fly list. And that's the mentality. So my whole thing is they did identify a lot of people, and they have identified a lot of people. The big question is what are they gonna do with them? What are they gonna do with them? And I think that question that he asked too can be answered by anybody. It doesn't have to be the three of us. It could be answered by anybody, because Michael jumped in there. I'm glad you did, Michael, because that question could be answered by anyone. How do you feel about the disparity between the two different races, or all the races, as far as that goes?
Michael, you said something earlier too, when we talking about what we're used to seeing in media when it comes to the portrayal of what we think police officers live up to. And that was a feature in one of our weeks in season 1 where we talked about law enforcement on film. And, we got these brooding, they break the law to solve cases. They use brute strength and just interrogation and methods and things like that to solve a case. And we see that's how officers are portrayed on film. And then in real life, we have these well-trained individuals who are in fear of their lives, placed in communities where they're sworn to protect and serve, in communities that they've never lived in or been in until it comes to clocking in at work. So you're policing a community that you know nothing of, and you're in fear for your life. One technique in law enforcement that I see an easy transition as to how we can seemingly get an uprise or an elevation of morality when it comes to law enforcement and community. If police should police communities that they live in, and I can understand one main cause that would probably say that police shouldn't police their own community, because then the community knows exactly where they live, and but I just see people who didn't have a gun put to their head that say that I want to be a police officer. they jumped into that line of work and got well trained and everything for those different scenarios and situations, but somehow the police has become the largest, or I don't even know if I'm exaggerating, the largest crime committers daily, whether it's in innocent murders or just random acts. But I read something just a day ago. It said that we were misled when we believed that law enforcement was placed to protect and serve. We were misled that in that sense that law enforcement is only to do what local officials and only to do what the lawmakers tell them to do. That's their only job, not to protect and serve, but what lawmakers tell them to do.
And I would say also to enforce capitalism. I mean, because that's ultimately what I saw that in action. You see a business that may have a burglary going on and the whole station empties out, yet when someone in the community gets hurt, you don't see the same level of enthusiasm. I think about the Tina Turner private dancer. And she says, in one line, she says, "You don't think of us as human. You don't think of us at all." And I think that's certainly what I saw in law enforcement, that the people in the community, mostly brown and African Americans, were not considered human. And they were there to have an adventure. They were there to play cowboy, which is exactly, I mean, I was so triggered on January 6th because I saw some of the same stuff. You know, they were cowboys. They were out for an adventure.
Yeah. And everyone, and you know that I was a firefighter for 35 years. And so, you know, we join it to help people, and we find ourselves trying to fit in more than we spend time helping people. So it's you know, you want to be part of the team, but you don't ever feel like you're part of the team. And so you kind of join together with your fellow brothers that are on the job, and then you feel like you're outcasting yourself. So it's a tough occupation, police and fire and law enforcement. But like Marlo said, we think you go in there to make a difference, to help people, and you find yourself in a tough situation. I got a question from someone. I think we need to address it. I'm not going to say the person's name. It says, "It's so frustrating having friends and family that are right extremists and pour their exhilaration of the Capitol riots into their social medias. How can I accept their beliefs and opinions while staying true to my heart and my beliefs, and not throw down with them or block them out of my life? Or should I block them out of my life?" I think someone's reaching out, and I think that should be answered. Shonda?
I mean, I think about this question all the time, and I was just having a conversation with someone at work about it today, because there are like these conversational cul-de-sacs that you get into where it's just a dead end, and you know, and there's even like a QAnon people who say, if you're not in this, you can't understand it. Like no one else can understand us. And if you look, I mean, I think NPR has actually done a good job of addressing this with experts who talk about how to, you know, that you have to meet people where, I mean, there's lists online of how do you approach people like this, but I'm not sure that, I mean, at this point, it's sort of, we know that it has a dopamine response, right? Like QAnon, discovering clues, fitting together your conspiracy theory, constructing this whole alternate reality. It creates addiction-like responses in the brain. So how we interrupt that, I think, is going to be a big challenge. I'm sorry, I started answering this question like I have an answer. I do not have an answer to this, but it's been on my mind a lot as well. So I would just want to maybe more commiserate with you than answer the question. Does anyone else have an answer?
I'm on Facebook.
I've had a dentist for the last 25 years, and I just found out that she's a Trump supporter, so I'm changing my dentist. So there is my answer right there.
But don't you think maybe you could have a conversation with your dentist like,
Yeah, and it's always a one-way conversation, right? Well, you know, there's people out there on January 6th, and they were this and they were that, and I'm looking up, you know, findadentist.com to, you know, so that
I think it's frustrating for young people when they, like she said, she's talking about family. She's not just talking about friends. She's talking about family. And I think it's a tough situation that she's in, because, you know, on Facebook, I'm on Facebook, and I got friends that are complete opposite of what I believe, and you know what, I like Sun Tzu, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So I want to see what they're writing down. I want to see what their information is, and study it, and I want to know what's going on the other side. But when you're talking about family, I think the answer is you got to be true to yourself. And as hard as it is, you need to be true to yourself. You know, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to battle against them. Just be true to yourself as you go through life, because it's a tough situation that you're in. And I think that the only thing you can do is roll through life, because one day you're going to be on your own, and you're going to have to deal with you, and not. I mean, that's like joining a gang. Do I join the gang? Do I not join the gang? My brother's in the gang. My sister's in the gang. Should I join the gang? Well, you got to be true to yourself. So that's what my response would be.
I do feel like, though, there's, you know, a lot of our exploration of this issue has shown that there was a large segment of America that felt, I don't want this to come across like any kind of defense of white supremacy, okay, but there was a large section of America that felt unheard. And I don't know how you address that, but I think that was part of the fertile ground for this to get so big, right? And Michael, I don't mean to discount the historical forces at work here, because I recognize there's an underlying structure, but I think there was also a slighting or a sense of, you remember Trump saying, I love uneducated people. Like there was a thing of I mean, the whole idea of the elitists aren't listening to us is a real thing.
I think the conversation, I'm sorry, go ahead, Michael. Go ahead, Michael.
No, I totally agree with you. And, you know, if you look at authoritarianism through not just our culture and history, but through it's the same sort of dynamic, but you have to understand it as a dynamic. I mean, there were people flying on private planes to go to that rally and attack the Capitol, right? They weren't really there because some economic circumstance.
Right, it's not all the dispossessed. We know.
That we have to understand how authoritarianism works. And I wish I could remember the name of the researcher who came up with this. I wrote about it in my book. There's studies about what she calls the authoritarian dynamic, where fear, we know from many different kinds of psychological studies, changes the way you think about threats. And you become very black and white in your thinking, pardon the expression, and identifying enemies and friends becomes a very cultural aspect, which again, I believe the war on terrorism started a lot of this, to raise the public fear and identify the fear as the other, often non-white in the description. And then what happens is, in that environment, you lose faith in institutions to protect you and instead look to a leader, a strongman leader who will protect you. And then that justifies more authoritarian rule, and it creates a big circle, kind of a ratchet turning down, that society becomes more polarized. And I think that's what the question originally was about. And I think there are a lot of families now where you can't, there's no longer a situation where we agree on these 7 subjects, we disagree on these 4, and still need to talk about these other 2. It's you're on this side or you're the enemy. And that is dividing our entire society. And that's part of what is happening with law enforcement, where the police find themselves, when they look at all the issues they're in favor of, and find themselves, when they look to their left and the right, oh, here's a white supremacist, here's a far right militant who are on my side against this common enemy that we have.
And I think Black folks have figured it out already without all of the psych stuff. And that Absolutely. Is, if Obama had never been president, we would never have had Trump. I think Obama being president scared the bejesus out of especially the people who were on the fringes anyway. And then they see a Black man, a very competent Black man, probably one of the most educated Black presidents we've ever had, who didn't have one scandal or anything. I think that scared people. What do white people think about this?
Mary, maybe Michael, you could speak to it. During the 8 years of Obama, did we see a rise in right-wing groups or militia groups? I faintly remember like reading some stuff on that, and maybe you could speak on that a little.
So this is a problem that I'm sure is a great obstacle to reporting on these issues. Is there is no objective count of these groups or the violence that they perpetrate. So it's hard to say that there is an increase or a decrease. What we do know is this violence has been persistent, and this rhetoric has been persistent. I mean, really the only thing Dylan Roof was during the Obama administration, right? We have to remember this violence is with us constantly. And, the white supremacists were pretty active in the 90s when Bill Clinton was president. So, it's not necessarily, I'm sure there are some people who were influenced by not being comfortable with a Black president, but I think they would have found something else not to be comfortable about. And I think that's what we have to be careful with, not imagining that this is something new, but that this is something persistent that we're only turning our attention to. If you look at research around this, they'll say the number of groups, hate groups, went up in 2008 when Obama started running, and then gradually came back down before Trump, and then they went up again, where what they're really counting are media reports. So, because we had a Black man running for president, all of a sudden all these articles were, oh, what do the white supremacists think about this? And you got all these stories that, a lot, and this is a frustrating thing having been in these groups, a lot of these people who get, quoted as the Ku Klux Klan of wherever they're from, they don't have a single follower. Nobody ever knew that they were part of the Klan until some mainstream news reporter went and interviewed them. And now all of a sudden people are calling them going, oh, I didn't know we had a clown in our county. Can I be part of your group? And they do become a leader. It's this strange phenomenon. So there's some good advice out there by some of the journalistic ethics groups about how to cover the far right. But putting a microphone in front of anyone who wants a microphone in front of their face is a mistake. If there's that guy who doesn't want the microphone or the camera on him, that's who you should be reporting on, the people who are actually engaged in the violent and criminal conduct.
I have to ask.
There's also Mary, I think, I'm sorry, I just want to address what Mary said. She was like, I hope that there's like a bit of a last gasp aspect to this.
Cool.
The demographic changes are inexorable, and definitely we have structures like the Supreme Court that are semi-permanent, that are going to remain out of step, like the Senate, for example, that are going to remain out of step with the American people. But I think people are increasingly aware of that. One of the things I did as a detachment was I went down to Georgia to do a story about Raphael Warnock in the before the runoff there, and I was on the trail with him. And unlike and I am also optimistic, but unlike any other campaign trail I had been on, I really sensed, and I lived in Georgia for quite some time. I sensed a really definite, distinct consciousness that this has been taken from us for too long, and we are not going to allow it to be. And we've been shown that it doesn't have to be taken from us. That's what Stacey Abrams did, right? Like, right. She demonstrated that it's actually possible to have an alternative to that. And people were like, oh, we're going to do this. We are not going to lose this election. And there was a fervor and a movement to it that I had not seen before. And I lived in the South for so long. I was like, there are so many Black people here. Why don't they have more political power? I didn't, like, there are a lot of answers to that. But, it just seemed like the dismantling was really starting to happen. And so I hope that there's some aspect to this that is sort of like an inexorable change, if that makes sense.
That is a good, that's a good observation. And I think Stacey Abrams losing that election and the Capitol attack, they're all things that are in your face. And because they were in your face, now I think people who didn't believe all the rhetoric saw it. It was in their face. Right,
you see it so clearly, you can't deny, you can't pretend it's something else anymore.
Exactly.
Right?
And so I was glad that, not glad that the Capitol was attacked, but I was glad that happened, because now people are texting me and Facebooking me and doing things, are now going, whoa, they're slowing down on their typing, and they're typing different stuff, and they're typing me bird pictures. So things have changed, and so now it's in their face, and now they have to deal with that. And like this young lady asked, what do I do? You got to deal with it.
I have to ask, with the before the Trump administration, we've only seen a template of what a president should behave like and how they should carry themselves, and we haven't seen much when it comes to this much and this rapid, this fast pace of just indiscrepancies with the administration, and just so many. But with the rise of Trump as president, it only leads me to question, what does the future hold? Because if Trump can make it into the White House, imagine the long line of characters that are in the gym right now, gearing up their political commentary, ready to take on this race. You know, we even saw hip hop throw their number in the hat with Kanye West.
Good point. Good point.
Imagine what's to come for our children now after seeing this.
Kurtis, did you have a comment? It seemed like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, earlier to Marlo's point about having police, from the community. I mean, I think that that's a good point when we talk about race and policing in this country. Is when we talk about de-escalation, like how can we de-escalate a situation? And you see with a lot of these shootings of unarmed Black men in some of these cities, the cops are from different communities. They police. They live out in the suburbs, or in a different part of a city that's been clearly redlined. And I think that that could be a critical point. When we talk about policing practices and de-escalation, is having police from the community. I think that Mary, you also brought up how do we break down the structure of white supremacy in police forces, or I think that having police from communities is a good step in addressing some issues.
Just one more anecdote, and I promise I won't tell any more war stories. But I was, I had a colleague when I was in policing. He was about to be transferred to Malibu, and where we worked was a station that doesn't exist anymore, Firestone Station. And I said, Joe, what are you going to do? You're being transferred to Malibu. You're not going to have any more fun. And he was like one of the worst, he was a real cowboy. And he looked at me squarely and he said, oh, I'm not worried about that, Mary. Every area has its, and then he used the N word. Every area has its, and he says, mine are going to be the hippies and the people who hang out on the beach. And I was never speechless, but at that time I really was.
Have you seen listen to Dick Gregory, Cowboys and Indians? It's an old album. I have the album, actually the vinyl. And he goes about cowboys and Indians. There's always the cowboys, and the cowboys are the supposedly the good guys, and the Indians are always the bad guys. And he goes all the way through it, and actually he ends up, and this is how old it is, he ends up in Kent State, where people died that day and got shot by the cops. And he says, and that was when the Black man said, I'm not your Indian anymore. And so it's a powerful album, but
well, it's like Richard Pryor said. Richard Pryor used the term, we got some, when the Vietnamese began to
exactly.
He said we got some new ends now.
That's
we don't
right.
you guys don't need us anymore. You got some new ends.
Yeah, he said, and Mary, he said that they're teaching the Vietnamese how to speak English because they were coming over to the States, and he said they were teaching them how to say the N word, and he said you'll get it when you got it right, because that's when you get your ass kicked, and that was the climate at that time. It was very activist oriented, and a lot of stars and movie stars were in the push and doing big things.
Guys, as we wind down in the show, because I know as a student, I know how students get when they sit down too long. So as we wind down the show, I would love for our guests to just speak to the students California State University of San Bernardino for a second. Just any closing remarks, just no matter their career choice, just to be in that seat where they're sitting right now, just becoming those top 1%ers in our nation, that rarity of changing the family curse, the dynamic, those first generation college students. If you had anything that you wanted to leave them with tonight, you guys being out there on the forefront every day. Michael, your expertise, man, I could just talk to you for days, like never run out of words with you, Michael. But if you wanted to speak to our college students tonight and just leave them with any last words, what would you say to them?
Well, you know, I feel bad giving any advice because my generation clearly failed to clean up this problem and address it the way we should have. And unfortunately, that responsibility falls to your generation. And you have the power to make change, but it requires making sure you understand the issues, you understand how power works in this country, and what levers you have to pull to get it done. But I do think that there is change on the horizon, and I hope you all make wise decisions.
And I would say, you know, just in everything you all do, you know, to do what you're passionate about, follow your heart. And if you're passionate about something, you know, just follow it, whether it's, you know, anything. I mean, I'm sure there's students on this call that have a wide array of interests, you know, always follow your heart and, you know, and your passion, and, you know, follow your true north, as people say, you know, and that's something that you just should always hold on to. And don't be deterred by anything. And, you know, just really just, you know, follow your heart. And just to close, you know, if any of you have a question or, you know, want to follow up after this, you know, with an email, you know, please reach out to me. I'd love to, you know, keep this conversation going. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Kurtis. And the other presenters, please, if you want to leave any contact information inside the chat, make sure you post it to the attendees so that they can reach out. I know they would love to. Anyone else with any final words for our students tonight?
Yeah, do your homework. And I'll see you next Tuesday. But I just want to thank Michael and Kurtis for your generosity. You know, I know we pay the big bucks, but you guys would do it even if you didn't get the bucks, right? I just think that I'm so encouraged to continue this because, you know, we keep upping the ante in terms of the quality of guests that we have had on these panels. And we just want to inform the community. We want to make the community better. I think that's why all of us are here. That's why we went into the work that we went into. And I just am so grateful that you all did this today.
Yeah, thank you to all the panelists. We appreciate you being here. And I just want to say thank you to the students. Boy, it's still hanging in there with us, and I appreciate that. I appreciate you hanging in there with us and being a part of this program every Wednesday.
Right, you students, you sounded off tonight in the Q&A. You've never responded that like that before. Like, that's amazing.
This touched a nerve. This touched a nerve. Yeah.
That definitely validates that we're giving you the content that you want to see, and we'll continue to provide that that open space, that safe space for us to continue to have these conversations and continue to make change. I just wanted to throw something out there. It's totally off, but Michael, you just trained FBI agents too, didn't you?
Yeah. Sure.
Man, you're just
FBI.
Well, then you're going to have to come back and talk about that because we just don't have the time right now.
Right.
I think that's fascinating. Bye, Kurtis. I'll be in touch because I'd like you to talk to my students also.
Yeah. Please do. Absolutely. Please do be in touch. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.